For today, we'd like to introduce a new source, a new sefer. It's also an anthology of tshuvas. It's called Haviani Chadarav, and it was published here recently in Israel. And I don't know if you received the text that David Spiegel was able to send out. I sent it to him. If you weren't able, then we'll have Torah Shebal Peh. If you were able, then you'll see in the Sefer Haviani Chadarav on page Kuf Lamed Hey a series of two tshuvas from Rav Moshe Brandsdorfer, who's the head of a bezdin here in Yerushalayim called Heichal, or Heichal Hora. And the first question he raises is regarding the use of a certain particular kind of a style, a model of a mask that came out recently. And what's kind of unique about this mask is that in order to fit it perfectly on your face, and especially to tighten the area around your nose, so separating your eyeglasses from your nose so you don't get fogged up, it has what he calls a pas dak, which is made of mateches. So it has a thin strip that is metal, almost a metal string, and it's inside the mask, but it's adjustable so that every person can tie it onto his face in a way that it fits on his face. And it's a very helpful kind of thing. So he says in our environment, where they're requiring you when you go out publicly to wear a mask, what happens on Shabbos with regard to this pas, this string, which you need to adjust so that it holds on properly to your nose. And he says that the issue on Shabbos is what's called tikkun monah. So let's say just a few words about that concept called tikkun monah. We don't improve utensils on Shabbos because to do so, if you do it on a permanent basis, make a change in a structure of a utensil, that's called makeh b'patish, which is the last of the list of the 39 malachas in Masechta Shabbos. And makeh b'patish means that final change, that final hammer blow that the professionals use. Now, he admits that we're not talking about a real tikkun monah because you're not really structurally changing the utensil. And furthermore, it doesn't require any sort of professional work, and it would not qualify on a biblical level as makeh b'patish, but he introduces a concept called mechzeh kimitakin monah. It looks like he's fixing up a utensil. And we have many isurim or shpusim d'Rabbanan, rabbinic isurim, to avoid on Shabbos things that look like a malacha, meaning there may be some technical reason why you are exempt in this case. You didn't really violate the malacha, but nevertheless, it's no element. And as a result of that similarity to malacha, the Rabbanan prohibited it. And he writes here in this tshuva that Horesi, I told the shoel in my tshuva, my ruling, that lechatchila yesh li mana bilasos kein b'Shabbos. That if all things are ideal, he should avoid this kind of situation, and he should set up the mask on Erev Shabbos, and by tightening it around his face and taking it off, if you could just put it back on, then he hasn't made any change, not even a slight change in the mask, and as a result, it's not even mechzeh kimitakin monah. So all this would be ideal if he could set this up before Shabbos. However, any good posek will always tell you what's the fallback position. It's Shabbos. This is the mask that I have. Are you telling me that it's absolutely prohibited? And here Rav Ransdorfer offers a very interesting suggestion. And he says, Im Elo Masecha Muchana, he doesn't have it prepared, Mibod Yom, Yafach Osa, Elyon Lamata V'Tachton Lamata. He says that what he could do is, he could turn it upside down. And although it won't be a perfect fit, because again, he wants to tie it around his nose to keep it above his, to keep it above his nose and separate all the air that's coming out of his nose and his mouth below that from his eyeglasses and so forth. He also wants to keep it tight so it doesn't fall down. But nevertheless, he thinks, and again, I'm assuming he checked this out, and it could be done upside down. Now, I think what he has in mind here, although it's a very short tshuva, you have to fill in the blanks, is that if we're talking in the worst case scenario, where he does it the normal way, that it's only mechsek in Mesakin Mana. So we're dealing with not a violation of holacha of makar patish d'oraisa, but rather it's a shvus d'Rabbanan. Then we could apply the principle of shinui. The Gemara very often, when it comes to d'Rabbanans, if there's a pressing need to achieve a certain goal, and it will entail violating an Issa d'Rabbanan, so the Chachamim will ask you to do it with a shinu, do it in an unusual kind of fashion. And now you have two factors working in tandem to permit this activity. Number one, it's only mechzek imitakin mana. He's tightening, but he's not adding something to the very structure of the utensil. And although he says it's a kind of a permanent change in the object, but it's not profound of a change, and he could always readjust it. For example, if let's say it didn't fit properly and so forth, so it's not really totally permanent. Add to boot that if he does it in an unusual way with a shinui, then we could allow it. And this is all for the sake of the need, because this is the mask that he has, and he wants to go out on Shabbos. So for example, again, he doesn't have any footnotes here, any analogies, but the Gemara has in Masechta Shabbos different kinds of concoctions that you mix together, with vinegar and other liquids, and you put in some dried grains and so forth, toasted grains, which is called keli in the Gemara, and he needs to make this concoction, and they have health benefits for him. So the Gemara says that he has to do it in an unusual way. Instead of putting the vinegar second, he puts the vinegar first, and then he adds the toasted grains. And that means that in a shvus d'Rabbanan on Shabbos, when necessary, we will allow doing it b'shinui. And it's very interesting because at the very end of this 10-line tshuva, he writes that ozniot, he calls them otmei oznaim, we call it ear stopples. He says they're made from a kind of silicon, and what you do is you actually change the form of it in order that it should fit your ears, like this case of the mask, which he's tying in a way that'll fit onto his face. And he says that also should be avoided on Shabbos, because mekablim tzuras ha'ozen, and he should not do this on Shabbos. He also talks about things that you put around your face and they take on the shape of your nose. All these come under michsei k'mesakin mana, and they should be avoided on Shabbos. When need be, litzorek gadol, we're going to allow you to do this with a shinui because it's only michsei k'mesakin mana and it's not real tikkun mana. His second question I found very fascinating. And this, he says, was asked by a Jew in America. And as a result of Corona, the authorities did not allow the synagogues to open at all, but in a later stage, they allowed the synagogues to open, but on the condition that there would only be 10 people praying in the synagogue in one place at one time. And this person who's writing the Shaila to Rav Moshe Brandsdorfer he has maybe the unlucky task of being the Gabbai of the Beis HaKnesses, so you could immediately guess what the question is going to be. There are 60 members of the shul that want to come to pray, and he has to decide which of these 60 members should get first dibs and should be zoche to be mispal b'tzibur. And I was very surprised personally by the answer of Rav Brandsdorfer. He's one of the very famous poskim here in Yerushalayim, and he says that the only way that I would allow you to daven in the shul is through a gorol. And you all know what a gorol is. A gorol is a lottery. And he says you have to take a lottery. Again, you could probably do this online, right? You pay a lottery for every single individual tefillah. In other words, somebody may win the lottery to be one out of 6 of the lucky ones for Shacharis, and then we'll have another gorol for Mincha and a third one for Ma'ariv. And only those who win the lottery will be allowed to enter into the Beis HaKnesses. He's not going to allow anybody in unless they won the lottery. And again, like any good posek, always giving you a fallback position. What happens if you don't have the ability to set up this gorol, let alone for every tefillah b'fnei atzmo? And listen how harsh he comes down here. Again, with a certain new perspective on this question. He says, "Im eino yochel laroch gorol mikol midei sibot." He says, if it's impossible to run this lottery for whatever reason, then do not open the doors of the Beis HaKnesses. Let everyone daven b'yechidus in his house. And what halachic principle is he implementing here? He says, Chamira sakanta me'isura. He wants to suggest that if there's no gorol, this is a sakana. What does he mean, a sakana? Let's say, I don't know, first come, first serve, right? So what's the element of sakana here? I mean, I understand the isura. The isura is that we want to daven b'tzibur, but what's the sakana here? And he writes, Ki im chas v'sholom al yidei chalukas hamakovos, through this process of deciding who's going to get to sit in the shul, yavo lidei isur of lashon hara, of sinas chinam, of ktata. Ktata means machlokes. Tia sakana gidola yosef. This will increase by a few notches the sakana of corona, and therefore counterintuitive here. It's paradoxical. By opening the shul and risking the possibility of machlokes as to who will get to sit there in shul amongst the 10 people that they allow, there's going to be some sort of an antagonism and a confrontation, which is going to undermine the peace and the harmony in the shul. It's going to create lashon hara. It's going to create machlokes. That is more dangerous, he says, than davening b'yechidus. So I wanted to add 2 comments here, and then I'll hear your comments as well. My first comment is that I think, whether consciously or unconsciously, he has in mind a famous tshuva of Reb Chaim Palaji, who was a posek in Turkey, about 2 centuries ago. Actually, just to show off my library. Just kidding. But I have in my hands 2 different books here. These are bibliographies. This book, by the way, is a biography about Reb Chaim Palaji. It's over 500 pages long. I mean, the man was a prolific posek, and amongst Sfaradim today, he's like, holy of holies. And he has an entire tshuva in which he claims, he's writing about a Magefa that took place 2 centuries ago, that it was so dangerous, the worst element in danger was machlokes. And he proves from a parsha in the Torah, the parsha of Korach and so forth, that a Magefa is very often a result of machlokes. And if you don't reduce the machlokes, then the Magefa goes up. It's an inverse relationship. The more that there's controversy and there is antagonism, the greater the sakana. And he goes on in his truth to write, a person should spend every last dime that he has in order to avoid machlokes during a magefa period, in order to guarantee both olam hazeh and olam haba. And therefore, it's a very great thing that the Jewish people want to daven b'tzibur and go to shul, but if it's going to create machlokes, drop it. Because of chamira sakanta beisura, the sakana of machlokes. It's interesting to look at machlokes from that perspective, to classify it not as, okay, we don't have the peace and the harmony in the community, terrible, but he's putting it in a whole new category. It's called sakana during a magefa. The second comment that I wanted to make is that if you happen to recall, we had a discussion about the Ezras Noshim, about the women, and they want to come to shul, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, etc., and there are those on the committee who want to advocate in favor of giving up those places for the men. And we had a long discussion about this, and I just wanted to point out to you that in the course of that discussion, this is just a review if you remember this, and if you don't, it's the first time you hear it, but it's very fascinating. About 2 centuries ago, during the cholera epidemic, Rabbi Akiva Eger, who's like the Holy of Holies for Ashkenazim, he writes a letter, and it's a long, long letter about Tefillah b'Beis HaKnesses, and it's almost like he's writing from the perspective of the Department of Health. I mean, it's unbelievable how many things he writes in the letter that you'll hear on the news about how to avoid the spread of cholera. And in this letter, he advocates in favor of limiting the number of people who are coming to shul. And he actually gives us a triage, a list of who comes first. So first on the list that we have to guarantee, and he's talking specifically here about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the Greivid, which means the Rav of the community, and then the Dayanim Kvuim. He says that there are Dayanim who live in the community, who serve on the Beis Din on a permanent basis, and then the Gabbai. We have to guarantee that the Gabbai is going to go to shul. If you leave him out, we're in trouble, especially during an epidemic, because the Gabbai has to really make sure that everything goes smoothly. And then he says that the Bali Tfilos, if you have, again, this is very specific to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, where you need a Bal Tfilah. Not everyone could serve as a Bal Tfilah, and a Bal Tokea. He says that in the Ezras Noshim, we have to make sure that the Rebbitzin gets a place. And then he goes on to say that there's a Gabaot. Okay, in other words, not only do we point to Gabbai on the men's side, but we have to point to Gabai on the women's side. This is Rabbi Akiva Eger 2 centuries ago. So that I don't know why Rav Bransdorfer doesn't quote this Igeris from Rabbi Akiva Eger. Maybe it missed his radar screen. And instead he has a goal. He wants to have a lottery. Maybe Rabbi Akiva Eger would accept a lottery after you've already assigned the seats to those who absolutely have to be there in shul. Okay, then, before I go on to the next shaila, which I want to ask and address, if anybody has any comments now, that would be appropriate. If not, again, I have a lot to tell you in the short time that we have, and it's up to you. You decide
I was surprised they didn't require or allow a person who has a chov to daven. You know.
I don't know. I don't see any discussion about a chov because you may argue that the ikar mitzvah is tefillah, and I'm not sure if somebody has to give up their place in the shul on behalf of someone else who has a chov. Maybe we could write another tshuva about that, and maybe someone who has yard site would have a special status. I don't know. Next question, which again, if you have the text, you'll find it here on page Kuf Tzadi Dalid in this book, Heviani Chadarav. And this is a tshuva from Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein, and I was totally unaware of this tshuva. And he writes that amongst the symptoms of corona, one of the most common symptoms is loss of smell. And as a result of loss of smell, we have also loss of taste. So I don't know if anyone here in the audience is willing to admit that they don't smell and taste like they used to. But if that's the case, then you probably had corona, whether you know it or not. And this is very common. So what's the shaila? So you may recall once upon a time, we discussed the issue of reach, of smelling, especially with regard to Havdalah, Motzei Shabbos. I don't know if you remember that discussion that we had. But this is a discussion about achila, about eating, and the issue is, do we make a bracha if we don't taste the food? Shall we say that the very fact that the food goes down the esophagus into the belly, I mean, that's enough to generate a bracha? Or do we say, no, you have to taste your food? Again, you may ask me, why do I have to taste my food? Well, here there might be a difference between what's called the bracha rishona, lefanea, and the bracha lachrea. In the case of the bracha lachrea, that's Birkas Hamazon, it says, v'achalta v'savata u'beirachta. So there's a very special emphasis on svia. And even if he doesn't taste his food, he feels satiated. That also is not so simple, because some people have symptoms in which they don't even feel satiated. But that's one approach that has to be mentioned here. And number two, with regard to Birchas Hanenim, which is the bracha Rishona, not the Shevach Odoya Lachrea. So where's the Hana? Now, Birchas Hanenim, when we talk about getting benefit from food, the halacha operates on two different levels, and we'll soon see this in the tshuva. One is called Hanas Grono, which is more or less the taste buds in his mouth, and the other is Hanas Mea, the feeling, as we said before, of satiation. So again, if I grant you the following premise that he does feel satiated, although he doesn't feel the taste of the food, we may perhaps want to differentiate between the bracha lachrea, which is Birkas Hamazon, and the bracha rishona. And a bracha rishona without tasting something is a problem. So if Zilberstein immediately, without even passing go, he points to the main sugya that formulates the principle that without enjoying your food and the taste of the food, you don't make a bracha. How do I know this? So this is sugya in Perek Tetzad Mevarchim, Daf Mem Daled Amud Beis in Masechta Brachos, and the Gemara says that if you're drinking water, then it depends. Im shasamayim litzimono, if he drinks water because he's thirsty, mevarich shahakol niya bidvaro. Im shoser lahavir etzem miagaron eno mevarich. So if you take this Gemara literally, the Gemara excludes a bracha in the following case. You have something caught in your throat, you want to clear your throat. Sometimes it's a matter of urgency, give me a cup of water immediately. And in such a case, you don't make a bracha. And we extrapolate from that case, that exception where you leave out the bracha, to other cases. And Tosfos says that this principle applies whenever he is drinking water and he's not enjoying the water. It doesn't quench his thirst. He's not thirsty. And it's not the case, it's not limited to the case where he has something caught in his throat. That's just an example of many possible examples. And a person might drink water because it's healthy for him. The doctor told him that he needs hot water. Maybe he has a cold and hot water will help him. It'll increase his body temperature. I mean, there are a host of different reasons why a person might drink water. And according to Tosfos, there's only one case where you drink water and you make a bracha on, and that's when you're thirsty. And now the question becomes, why isn't it considered beneficial, or hana, as you would say, when he's choking on a piece of bone or something? You know, he swallowed a bone, whether it's a fish bone or a meat bone, I don't know, but he's got to get it out. That's also called hana. But the answer is that hana does not have any taste benefit. He doesn't enjoy the taste in any sense. When you quench your thirst, that itself is considered hanas grono. But when you're taking something out, or for example, Tosfos gives another example, the refuah, that he's drinking something simply for therapeutic purposes, then lo boy bracha. And he quotes from the Amram Gaon, he quotes one of the Gaonim, you don't make a bracha. Now, there's a machlokas, two opinions in Tosfos, about whether he makes a bracha achrona in such a case. So again, he fills up his belly, but not for the purpose of enjoying anything. He doesn't get any benefit from the taste. He's drinking the water for any number of reasons, but not to quench his thirst. And he doesn't make a bracha lefanel. Tosfos says that according to Rav Amram, one of the Gonim, he says you make a bracha lacherav, but if he fills up his belly, he makes a bar nefashos. And then he quotes Rabbeinu Moshe, who says no, that if he's not nene, then even li'achrov, he doesn't make a bracha. And the Shulchan Aruch paskins in Orach Chaim Simon Reish Dalid, hashosa mayim litzma'o, mevarich shahakol, uli'achrov bar nefashos. If he's thirsty, he makes the bracha lefanel, the bracha lachrel. Aval in chanikose umsa, if he got stuck with a bone in his throat, shasa mayim lahavir umsa, he drinks the water to get rid of that bone. Einam avarich lo lefanov, vil lo li'achrov. And the Mishnah Berurah points out over here that the Shulchan Aruch, by paskening like that second opinion in Tosfos Rabbeinu Moshe, he's equating the bracha before you eat with the bracha after you eat. And in both cases, you need to have hana from the mayin. And if he's not doing it for the hana purposes, he's only doing it to get rid of something that he got caught in his throat, and he's not thirsty at all. His chech, his palate doesn't get any benefit. Then in such a case, not only does he omit the bracha lefanel, but he even omits the bracha lachrea. But then the Mishnah Berurah wants to suggest that this halacha only applies to mayim, only to water. And in the case of water, which has really no taste to it, the hana of mayim is the tzimon, the thirst, the quenching of the thirst. Aval kishashosa shar mashkim, if he's drinking other beverages, in such a case, even though so imagine, again, I'm not a beer drinker, but let's say all you had to get rid of this bone that's caught in your throat was a bottle of beer. He says, in such a case, the Mishnah Berurah says, he will make both brachas. Why? Because there is some sort of benefit that he gets from other mashkim that have a taste to it. Now let's get back to our case. We're talking about a corona victim who has no sense of taste. He doesn't have a sense of smell either, probably. He doesn't get any benefit from his food. Can he make a bracha on his food? And the answer seems to be that although he's motivated by let's go back to Mishnah Berurah's case, he's motivated by the need to get rid of this bone in his throat. Nevertheless, he gets some benefit from it because it does have inherent taste. Says Rav Zilberstein, here in this case of the Corona victim, right? He might be drinking other beverages, but he doesn't get any benefit from the taste. He just doesn't have functioning taste buds. In the case of the Mishnah Berurah, although he's not motivated to drink because of the pleasure that he gets from the taste, but nevertheless he does get the pleasure. And since he enjoys the benefit, is hanos cheich, therefore he makes a bracha both l'fanei and li'achrei. But lu yitzur, what would be in a case where he gets no benefit whatsoever, he's just not capable physically, biologically of doing so, then even the Mishnah Berurah would agree that although we're not talking about water, we're talking about other beverages and other foodstuffs, he would not be making a bracha because there's no hana whatsoever. And then he quotes the Ra'ah. Now the Ra'ah was a Sephardic Rishon almost 1,000 years ago, Rabbeinu Aaron HaLevi, and he writes that the reason why the Gemara in Masechet Brachos addresses the case of water exclusively is for another reason entirely. And that is because Maya lo zaini. Maya does not have calorie content. I'm giving it my own twist, meaning there's no real satiation in the body from water. Again, psychologically, you may feel that your stomach is bloated, it's full of water, but in truth, it does not engender what's called zaini. And that is what is excluding Maya. And therefore, the Ra'ah comes to the following conclusion, that there are two independent machayvim that would generate a chiyuv bracha. One is hanoas chech, that he enjoys it, and that would apply in the case of water because he's thirsty. And number two, in the case of other beverages, maybe because he tastes the unique, enjoyable taste of the beverage, even though he's not motivated for the hana. And there's another machayev, which is called zaini. And zaini means that it increases your calorie content. It gives you a sense of satiation, and it gives you energy, and so forth and so on. And therefore, the Ra'ah is now breaking new ground. He's offering me a whole new alternative route for justifying a chiyuv bracha. We're obligated to bracha because of zaini, even in a case where he has no hanos chech. So that in the case of water, if it would have been zaini, then it's irrelevant to whether he's thirsty or not thirsty, and he quenches, that's irrelevant. He has zaini. But the answer is that water is unique, it doesn't have zaini. In other beverages, zaini itself, the fact that it, as we said before, it gives you those calorie content, that itself is hanos me'ayim. That's enough to generate a bracha. And before I take questions, I just want to add, so we get the whole picture, a tshuva from the Avnei Nezer, and the Avnei Nezer. And again, I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for showing up here today. It's very nice that you joined me for the shir. And the Avnei Nezer says the following, that according to the Ra'ah, that Hanas Me'av, the fact that he is now satiated, is enough to generate a bracha. He says, I have a Minchas Chinuch, and the Minchas Chinuch wants to suggest that, at least according to one opinion, we need two things. We need what's called Hanas Grono, and we also need Hanas Me'av. In other words, when we go back to the pasuk, it says V'achalta Misavata, and then Uberachta. And Birkas Hamazon becomes our paradigm for brachos, and you need two elements. two conditions that have to be fulfilled. Not the way the Ra'ah said it, that it's one, either one or the other. And even if you have no Hanoas Grono, you will make a bracha because of Hanoas Me'av when he feels Zaini. But the other option is we need both. We need Hanoas Grono and Hanoas Me'av. We need V'achalta, and V'achalta means the Hanoah that you get from eating, because you taste the food and enjoy that benefit. And we need V'savata, the Hanoas Me'ayin. And the Avnei Nezer says that we don't need both Hanoas Grono and Hanoas Me'av, although again there is certainly such an approach. And again, after doing a lot of research, the Avnei Nezer, who is the Sakach of a Rebbe, he writes that it's Machlokas, the Rambam, and Rashi. And Rav Zilberstein comes to the conclusion, based on a Gemara in Psachim, that all you need is Hanoas Me'ayim, even without Hanoas Grono. And what does the Gemara tell him in Psachim? This is like our curveball from left field. The Gemara says, Bola Matzah Yotza. And if a person takes a piece of matzah and he literally shoves it down his throat, he swallows it, he's Yotza. However, Bola Morar, if he shoves Morar down his throat, Lo Yotza. And the Levush, who lived about 5 centuries ago, once again, I have a copy of his Sefer here, writes that the difference between matzah and Morar is that although matzah has an element of zecher legeula ulecherus, nevertheless the ikar achila is lisova lamale es kreso kishehu ra'ev. That if he has hunger, he's suffering from hunger. Now he eats the matzah, and he no longer is hungry, and that's the kiyum mitzvah. And he's yotzei b'bliya. But in the case of marar, marar has nothing to do with filling up his belly. The entire mitzvah of marar from A to Z can be reduced to the marirus, to the tam marirus, that he feels the bitter taste. And if he shoves it down his throat in such a way, again, you'd have to imagine how he'd do it, but he doesn't feel the marirus. But in matzah, although maybe he won't have that element of cherus, but he will have the basic mitzvah of achila, which he will fulfill even biblia, even without enjoying it. So Zilberstein, in a brilliant move, quotes this Gemara, as I said, from left field to prove that we will make a bracha simply because the belly is filled. And he says the following. If you read the Gemara carefully, I'm going to play a game with you. I'm going to make up a Gemara that doesn't exist, just to demonstrate my point. The Gemara says that if he swallows the matzah, he can't make a bracha of hamotzi lechem min haaretz, or the bracha of al achilas matzah, and he cannot recite Birkas Hamazon. Well, that's not true. The Gemara doesn't say that. So here's the diuk of Rav Zilberstein. He says if you read the Gemara Psachim carefully, the entire issue in the Gemara is whether or not he fulfills the mitzvah of achilas matzah and he catches morar through blia, and even though he doesn't taste the matzah, can he make a bracha on it? The Gemara never addressed the issue of the bracha of hamotzi lechem min haaretz. That was a given that he would make that bracha, even in the case of bala matzah. So although Avnei Nezer vacillates back and forth in his tshuva whether you need hanas grono as a prerequisite for the bracha lefaneh and the bracha lachreah, and it could very well be that the Avnei Nezer is right, and it's a machlokas Rashi and the Rambam, but the final decision for the ruling la'alach l'maisa is going to be based on the Gemara Psachim, that bala matzah, since he has hanas kreso, he will make all the brachos, and in this case, even the bracha for the cherus, for the al achilas matzah. And therefore, both bracha lefaneh hamotzi and bracha lachreah birkas hamazon will be recited based on the fact that you feel satiated. It adds your calorie content. That's my own addition. And he says, Binyanenu, therefore, in our case of Corona, Afal Pisha Ein Lo Hanos Goron, even though he feels no taste because his taste buds are not working, he doesn't smell anything, he doesn't taste anything. Nevertheless, he will recite the bracha, V'havi ke'ein bola matzah. And his situation would be like the case where he shoves the matzah down his throat. Sheyochel levarech birkas hamotzi u birkas hamotzi. Yeah.
Would you not? You couldn't bring up.
Drop louder if you don't mind, because
Sure.
on Zoom.
You couldn't. You wouldn't say that they're bringing up matzah as opposed to something else. That maybe the Indian of mitzvah is also being a part of this equation. It didn't say, what is it, kutnius, whatever that other stuff was that they always put it in the Gemara. That
No, Joe.
maybe
The reason why the Gemara mentions is because you would have a hama mina salkadaita mina, just like in bala mara, where you're lacking the cherus element, or in this case the marirus element of Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim, and therefore you're not Yotze. It completely undermines the mitzvah of Mara when you shove it down your throat. You might think the same thing should apply to matzah, and that's why there's so many Gemaras about starving yourself on Erev Pesach in order to eat matzah l'teyov. So you would think that enjoying the matzah is critical. But mashmalan, no, it's not critical. But says Rav Zilberstein, the Gemara never questioned whether or not he has to make birchas hanenim and birchas hamazon on the matzah when he's swallowing. And the answer is because there's another machayev in birchas hanenim that's irrelevant hanas grono, so you're not tasting anything in your taste buds, you're shoving it down your throat, and that's called hanas meo. And that itself is enough of a machayev for the mitzvah of birchas hanenim and lefanea and the bracha. Now again, we don't have time for this, but I just want to throw out the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer has pages and pages in his tshuvas about the difference between Anos Me'ov and Anos Grono. And the Chassam Sofer is of the opinion that with regard to Yom Kippurim, everybody agrees that it all depends on Hanos Me'ov. Why? Because the Isser is an Isser Inui, and the Gemara talks about Yisuve Daite. That's why there's a special shear of how much you have to eat in order to violate Yom Kippur, and that's called Kikkel Seves Agasa, because the Gemara says that gives you Yishuv Adas. You're in a starving situation, and you feel to some minimal extent, it quiets down that hunger pain, and you feel somewhat satiated, and Hanos Me'ov is enough to qualify as a hafkah of Inu. Again, I'm just mentioning this if you're interested. There's a lot of discussions. What I would like to talk to you about now is a tshuva, which again, if you have the pages that David was kind enough to send around, you may find it as page Reish Nun from this Sefer of Haviani Chadarav, if it happened to have appeared on your screen. And, here in Israel, there's an entire the word I'm looking for, reshet, how do you say in English, a network of synagogues which are called Chanichei HaYeshivas. We have one here in Har Nov, and there's one in a great neighborhood not far from here. It's walking distance, called Romema. And the Rav of Chanichei HaYeshivas in Romema, his name's Rav Naftali Kupshitz, who comes from a great Skayan of Nolan. He has a bunch of tshuvas here. Each one is more stunning than the other. I'm going to share with you one of them. And he's talking about the following situation. Now, again, I don't know where you're up to in Canada as far as davening inside and outside. I can just tell you that here in these parts, there's still many, many people who are davening outside and are not going into shuls. Again, it's a slow process that's changing, but it's not happening overnight. So a lot of what he writes here is still very relevant today. And he's talking about the following kind of scenario, where you're out there in a chotzer or in a mirpeset, you're out on a porch or some sort of a courtyard, and the minyan is not all together in one place. So here you have a gigantic machlokas that dates back to the time of the Rishonim. Is it enough, as the Rashba would have it, that you see each other even from a distance, and you're not really within the same makom technically? Or like all the other Rishonim who disagree with the Rashba, they say, no, you have to be in one place. So that if you're davening in a shul, that's fine. And you certainly have a minyan if there are 10 men. But if you're davening outside, then most of these minyanim, outdoor minyanim, are relying on the Rashba. And the poskim already write, b'makom, b'shas adchak, we're going to fall back on the Rashba. And we're going to say that you could have a tziruf minyan even from one chutzah to the other if you can see each other. Fine. But now, he wants to ask the following question. What happens if the porch that you're on, or even the courtyard, might be roofed? Once it's roofed, which is called tikra, we have a principle called Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosek, which means that from the outer lip of that roof, there is an imaginary mechitza that goes up and down. And you and I might say, well, who needs it? Why do I want to confuse myself and make life more complicated myself by applying the principle of Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosek? So he proves that in a number of different scenarios, we need Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem. And it's a really good thing, and we should be applauding it. In this particular case, it's not a good thing. Meaning that if we apply Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem, then if you're standing on another mechitz, on another merpeset, or another chotzer, and I'm in this chotzer, and one of the two chatzeros, or one of the two mirpasot is roofed, then guess what? We have a mechitza that separates our group from your group. And my group is made up of 5, your group is made up of 5. There's a mechitza in between us. And to the best of my knowledge, no one has addressed this issue. And again, we've been reading a lot about tefillos and about outdoor davening and getting a minyan and who could say Kaddish and when can you say Kaddish. No one, except for this Reb Naftali Kupshitz, has raised the issue of mechitzos, that the problem is that in many situations where we're davening outside, there are mechitzos, and that's called Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem. And in this brilliant piece of research, he mentions a gigantic machlokes amongst the poskim about a case in Sukkah of an imaginary mechitza. And there are a number of different scenarios and situations in which you have imaginary mechitzos, but the problem is that as a result of those imaginary mechitzos, the sukkah is going to become invalid. And the reason for invalidating the sukkah in those imaginary sukkahs is because by setting up that mechitza, you're going to have less than 3 mechitzos. So imagine a case where you have, let's say, again, I don't want to get into all the details here, Tzuras HaPesach in the middle of your sukkah, or imagine a case where there are people who are sitting under the roof of the sukkah and they want to be part of the sukkah, but we're going to apply Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem. So again, let's say the roof is, for that matter, has schach on it or something kosher for schach, and we're going to apply Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem. And now we have people who are actually sitting outside of a sukkah. Why? Because of this imaginary mechitza that splits the sukkah into 2 places, into 2 parts. Now, again, if you have the text and you have the time to go through this, because I still have to cover a few more things today that are on my agenda, you'll take a look on page Reish Nun. The last paragraph on the page starts with the words v'nistape. And basically, here's where the machlokas arises. conceptually. Is an imaginary mechitza, period. That's all it is. And by the way, Bobby, I don't know why I see you upside down, like you're on the moon. I don't know, things are moving around. So it's very distracting. Now I see your beautiful face. Okay, fine. All right. Anyway, so now the question is, how do these imaginary mechitzas work? Is it A or B? A is the mechitza is a given. The halacha recognizes that mechitza, like it or not. Or B, the halacha gives you the option of recognizing this mechitza as a mechitza. But we don't shove it down your throat. It's not like bola matzah that we spoke before, where somebody shoves matzah down your throat. We're talking about a case where the imaginary mechitza, the halachic legal mechitza is there, it exists, but you don't want it. You would rather do without it. And this is going to be a gigantic controversy. And interesting, he quotes one of the Gedolim of the earlier generation, Rabbi Avram Genechovsky, and I'm pretty sure I have to do more research. I know the family. But anyway, Rabbi Avram says that he told his people that when the Shliach Tzibur is waiting for the repetition of Chazar Sashatz till he gets a minyan in the base medrash, he has Asara. He says, don't include in the Asara those who are standing under the roof of the Ezras Noshim. So it seems that, again, he doesn't go into detail about the engineering and the architecture of the shul. I can only guess that there is a separate roof for the Ezras Noshim. Maybe they're on the higher level, or maybe they're lower, below, whatever it might be. And he says, when you're calculating the Asara, be makpid, that all the Asara are in your roofed area. None of them are on the side. And the reason for that is because of Pi Tikra Yored Mesosem. And therefore they're not mistaref to the minion. Pilei blood. This is one of the Gdolim, Mechveis 100 years ago, maybe more, I don't know, he doesn't tell you when, who is paskening that because of Pi Tikra Yored Mesosem, those guys are not part of the minion.
I'm sorry.
So in our case of the Mirpesa that we spoke about, you can talk from now until doomsday about the Rashba, that the Rashba is saying, well, we see each other, blah, blah, blah. But that won't help you if we're separated by a mechitza because we're in two different rooms. Unless you reject this Rabbi Avram Genechovsky and you say, well, I don't want that Pitikra Yored B'Sosei. I want to be part of this minyan. I want to be part of this room. I reject the existence of this mechitza. And again, I only touched on the, how should I say, scratch the surface of this tshuva. It's a brilliant tshuva with a lot of bakiyas back and forth. He's got Beis Yosef's here, and he's got Rashba's here, and he's got Shulchan Aruch, and he's got a Bir Agra. So I didn't even touch on this, but I just wanted to share with you this issue that, at least to me, I didn't know anyone who had addressed it, and it's very, very relevant in many, many situations today with regard to outdoor minyanim and possibly even in indoor minyanim, irrelevant to Corona.
Again, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Yeah.
Just for a second,
you know what, Joe? Would you be able to hold your question? Go ahead, ask your question. Sorry, there are a lot of people here, and I'm trying to
just very quickly with regards to this. You're talking about, Clanton Park. There's a balcony, right? So is he saying that the balcony, anybody below the balcony would be considered in another room because
correct? That's what we're saying. That if you're in a balcony that has a roof on it, if that roof is a separate area for that section of seating, so you have a group of women that sit on, normally women, but he's talking about men are here, but the women sit under a roof in a balcony, and the Pi Tikra, wherever that roof ends, creates an imaginary chitza going up and down. Okay, I just wanted to, if you want to research this beyond me, just write me an email and I'll prepare for next week, because many, many profound details. Those who are learning Eruvin this year, for Daf Yomi will be very fascinated by some of these issues. But what I wanted to talk to you about is the latest Gilyon, the latest edition of Omek Upshot. And we don't have time for everything. Most of what he discusses here in the latest edition of Omek Upshot is what he calls Lachash Baduk Umenuseh. And this has to do with, people who are desperately ill and whether or not they can go back to the Talmud, the Gemara, and take from the Gemara various kinds of therapies. And many of them are based on lachash. Who could translate lachash for me? Whispering? No, there's got to be a better word. Incantations, I think they're called in fancy English. So there's certain things that you say as you're doing this around. Like, for example, you have something caught in your throat and you, chas v'shalom, you could die from it. So you say, chad, chad, noches bola, bola, noches, chad, chad. I mean, there are various lichashim. Anyway, so if we have time today, I want to talk to you about that. But what's more fascinating to me is that on page 3 of this Gilyon, of the Omek Upshot, in a separate box on the top, he has a discussion about Birchas HaGomel. Now, what we're talking about is someone who had corona, and Baruch Hashem, he recovered. And now the question is he chayiv in HaGomel? So we're not talking about a case of someone who is deathly ill, chas v'shalom, he was on a ventilator. I mean, I was saying Rabbi Keller from Tells in Chicago was on a ventilator already 6 months. I've been saying 3 times a day, tefillah for him. Unfortunately, he passed away just 2 days ago. But for those people who survive a ventilator, I don't know what percentage that is. They certainly have to bench Gomel. There's no question about it. But then we go down a madrig. We talk about people who are hospitalized, or people who weren't hospitalized but they had heavy fever, and there are many, many different madrigas. Rav Weiss, Rav Osher Zelig Weiss, in one of his tshuvas about corona, he writes that as far as the Sfaradim are concerned, anyone who had corona should make Birchas HaGomel. As far as Ashkenazim is concerned, if he had a very light case, and certainly if he had no symptoms whatsoever, he doesn't make the brach of HaGomel, unless he was nafal lemishkav. Now, if he was nafal lemishkav, it means that he had general weakness in his body. He already fits into a category in halacha called the chola she'ein bo sakana. So the rofim, the physicians have determined that his life is not in danger. Should he recite a birchas HaGomel? And here Rav Weiss says that if he had general weakness in his body, it means that this disease never has affected him in a serious way, and it could have easily ended up a lot worse. Hashem saved him, and therefore he's like a yotzei mibeis hasurim, and he has to recite the brach. If, on the other hand, a person went into quarantine, let's say, and he didn't feel any sort of symptoms, and it could very well be, and we can even test it to prove that he had corona, he will not make a brach. Now, Rav Reuben, Yitzchak Reuben, who's a few feet from here in Har Nof, that's where you may remember the terrible terrorist attack took place. Anyway, Rav Reuben has a parsha sheet for Parshas Emor in this case, and he writes that kosher loseis kitzva brura mitzarch levarchu milo. He says that there's so many gray areas here for Ashkenazim as to whether they should bench HaGomel or not. And he tries to give guidelines, but at the end of the day, he says that there are so many, what should I call it, bein hashmashos, twilight zone cases, and it's very difficult. And at the end of his tshuva, he wants to suggest that maybe a person, if he was not hooked up to a ventilator, if he was not hospitalized, maybe he should make Birkas HaGomel if he had certain symptoms without Shemu Malchus. He just leave out Shemu Malchus. What am I fascinated about? And again, we only have a few minutes. Anyone who has to leave, that's fine. If you could stay 5 minutes later. Here in the Omek Pshat, on page 3 of the latest Million, he has a fascinating discussion here. In a case of a suffix, what to do, and you don't know whether to recite Hagomel. I don't know about you guys, I have this all the time. Very often in my life, I have a suffix Birkas Hagomel. And he quotes a tshuva from Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And this is fascinating, because when the Shulchan Aruch himself says there's a doubt, like in Orach Chaim Siman Reish Yud Tes, he's got two opinions with regard to Birchas HaGomel, and let's say he was in danger, but not such danger, he doesn't fit into the 4 categories of danger, which are enumerated by the Gemara in Brachos, then he says in such a case, Tov levarich below azkarach shemu malchus, like we saw before in Rav Rubin's tshuva. Good. So that can help us in all these gray area cases of corona. But Rav Shlomo Zalman has a very fascinating eitzah. I don't know if you're aware of this. I was totally unaware of this. And he says that in the morning, when he gets to the bracha that Chazal added on as a tag on to the Birchas HaShachar, which ends with the words Hagomel Chasadim Tovim Li'amo Yisrael, he should make sure that another 9 people are listening when he makes that bracha out loud. Rabbi, are you aware of this? I never heard of this. This is brand new to me. So he will recite Hagomel Chasadim Tovim Li'amo Yisrael as printed in the Siddur, out loud in front of another 9 people. He should try to be makpid that amongst the other 9 people there are 2 Talmidei Chachamim. Okay, that's a sugya of Hagomel. And then he adds that he should also perhaps add 2 words to the end of the bracha, and he should say Shegmalani Kol Tov, because then he has an exact duplicate of the nusach of Birchas HaGomel. And he asks the question, well, we don't change the nusach HaBrachos, that's called Meshana Mimatbeh Shetovu Chachamim. He says, no, Meshana means when you make a change in the nusach HaBracha, if you add something after you've already recited and completed the nusach HaBracha, that's not a violation of Meshana Mimatbeh Shetovu Chachamim. So we don't have a minhag of reciting, Hagomel Chayavim Tovo Shegmalani Kol Tov, but if he adds that, and he has kavanah in his bracha that should be in place of Birchas HaGomel, he has another 9 people that are listening to him. He says this is the best way of getting out of the suffix. And again, I'm fascinated by this because I think it's going to help me in many ways. And Rav Shlomo Zalman says that this is much better than saying the bracha without Shemu Malchus. The only pill I have is how come the Shulchan Aruch didn't think of this 4.5 centuries before Rav Shlomo Zalman? And he says because without Shemu Malchus, it's really not a bracha at all. There's no such thing as a bracha. The halacha doesn't recognize the validity of a bracha without Shemu Malchus. It's just that he's mareh es ritzono lahodus Lashem. It's just sort of a way of his telling God, if I only could, and I had those suffix, I would certainly express my gratitude. This is the best I can do under the circumstances. But if you add it to this particular nusach habracha at the end of Hagomel Chasadim Tovim, then Li'amo Yisrael, then you are saying it with Shemu Malchus. And it's a bona fide bracha. And to boot, you're going to add Shegmalani Kol Tov. And he offers another suggestion, which he thinks is not a good suggestion, that when you get to Vayevarech David, right before the Shiras Hayom, where you have Shemu Malchus, it says, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokei Yisrael, and then it goes on to say, L'cha Hashem HaMamlocha. So L'cha Hashem HaMamlocha is considered malchus, and then he should recite the bracha Ugmalani Kol Tov in front of 10 people. And he quotes the Piskei Tshuva, who's Hungarian, right? One of the poskim in Hungary, and he says that's what you should do if you have a suffix. Says Rav Shlomo Zalman, I don't think that's a good idea, because to make such a bracha publicly, you know what? He's adding something in the middle of Psukei de Zimra. It's just not appropriate to make that public. But if you add to the bracha of Agomel Chasadim Tov Liam Yisroel Malani Kol Tov, that's not considered Mishana Mimatbea Shetomucha. I thought that was worth its weight in gold. So let's just very quickly summarize what we covered today. First of all, we discussed the question of using a mask that requires you to adjust this metal pass. Secondly, we discussed the question of how to choose which of the 10 people in the community will get to daven in the shul. We discussed the tshuva about Birkas Hanenim in someone who never, because of Corona, he has no taste buds and he can't enjoy the food. We discussed the case of Amida, of a kind of a false, we discussed the case of Paretz Murubala Omed when you don't have, or P. Tikra Yori Visosen when you don't have a bona fide mechitza. And if it's a halachic mechitza, can he say, I don't want that mechitza? And as a result, he could be mitzaref with a minion. And finally, we discussed the question of someone who's in a suffix, whether he has to recite Birkas HaGomel or not, with the Eitzah of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. What we didn't get a chance to discuss, which you have in the pages that I sent you, is the use of aquagel on Shabbos. And if it's a very thick kind of a solution, it's not like liquid soap, and it might be a problem, and we'll see what the poskim have to say about this. At this point, if anyone has any questions, now's a great time to ask. And if not, I'll take this opportunity to thank you again for coming. Hope you got something out of the shiur. As I always say, it's fascinating how the need of the hour has created new Torah. And here's this book called Haviani Chadorav. Just to give you an idea, the book itself has almost 600 pages.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question. I think what Joe was asking, I think maybe you misunderstood him. He was saying in the Clan Park Sanctuary, okay, part of the men's section is under the ladies section, and there's like, you could think of it as like a roof over that part of the men's section. So the question he's asking
is it a separate roof, or it's one roof that goes straight across?
No. See, well, let's say the sanctuary roof is, for argument's sake, 100 feet high. Well, it's whatever number it is, okay? And then where the balcony juts out over the men's section, there's like the floor of that, which is the ceiling of the sanctuary, that part, which is only about 10 feet high.
Oh, I understand. Yeah. That. The
question is, if those guys under that overhang,
right?
You say, please take your size them, and they're exposed to minion.
That's exactly this tshuva of the Rav of the shul. Yeah. If you're underneath the overhang, and the overhang it functions ad hoc. I mean, in fact, in Metzius, it functions as a roof. Yeah. And you're sitting under that roof, you can have P. Tikra Yori Visosa.
That's what Joe was asking.
Well, I reject it. I don't want it. By the way, he has that case of Sukkah. And if you get a chance to research it, he has a case where some of the people will benefit from the mechitza, and others will lose from the mechitza. Is that mechitza subjective, and those who benefit get the mechitza, and those who don't will not have the mechitza? Or do we go bus a row? Or does each person determine for himself whether it's a mechitza based on whether he wants it or not? Again, if you have time to research that.
The question also is if you have negative kavanah, then you don't want that. In general, if you have such a thing in existence.
That's what he's saying. I mean, usually, if not for this tshuva, I would have told you, like Rav Ganavsky says, make sure to come in, from where you're standing and join us under one roof, because otherwise you're not part of the minyan. There's a P. Tikra Yori Visosen. But he's saying that there's another approach, and he he does the research, and those poskim say that it's all a question whether you want it or you don't want it. In the case of a mitzvah, you could say, well, mitzvah shrichas kavanah. If I have a negative kavanah, certainly I don't want to keep my mitzvah. But in case of mechitza, if the Torah recognizes this as a mechitza, you might not perceive the mechitza with your eye, but the mechitza is there, and that's P. Tikri Yored V'Sosem. He's got another case of Tzuras HaPesach. He's got a third case of Paritz of Omed Merubal HaParitz. Like, for example, in the Amic Learning Center, right? So we have a room off the main base measures, and there's a door that opens and connects that room to the base measures. Are the people in that room considered part of the minyan? Now, if you go to Rashba, so offhand, you have no problem. Again, the poskim don't accept the Rashba, but if you want to rely on the Rashba, they see you and you see them, so you're not sitting in the same place. But if you go with the problem of mechitzas, that room has a mechitza. Oh, but I opened up the door. Yeah, but my friend, even if you open up the door, you're still in a situation of Omed Merubal HaParetz. And if Omed is Merubal HaParetz, so the door opens up, let's say, 50 centimeters, but you still have, the wall that's 3 times that size or 5 times that size. And then you have Omed Merubal HaParetz, which, by the way, is in today's daf. I don't know if you did today's daf, but in Erev.
Doesn't that come back to what the story of with the Rav, where he davened mincha and people are outside the door? You
right. So
mentioned that
outside the door, if the doors are open, you see, in Rav Salvatius' classroom, there were doors all over the place. So you could mamish open up the doors and people were outside. Yeah, well, it's possible. I don't know. Maybe Rav Soloveitchik relied on those poskim, or he came up with it his own. That I don't want that mechitza. Why? Because if I accept that mechitza, I'm outside of the minyan. It's possible. I don't know. That would require a lot more research.